So, good afternoon, ladies and gents, and a very warm welcome to our second keynote of the day. I'm absolutely delighted to be introducing you to our keynote for this afternoon, Sazeni Mojapelo, an expert within this work that we are speaking about. How do we build better societies? So Sazeni is a tri-sector leader with experience of working in government, in corporate and civil society organizations. She has worked extensively across corporate, across non-sector organizations, spearheading such amazing initiatives throughout the continent and beyond. And she is schooled at Harvard and has been to UCT. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Sazeni Mojapelo to give us more of her nuggets around building better societies. Over to you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Sharon, and good afternoon to all delegates. It is a privilege to be speaking to you this afternoon. And I trust that the first keynote, Imitators from the Gift of the Givers, left you inspired to be a force for good at an individual level. I must say, every time I've listened to him, I have been inspired by his story. I do have a presentation, so I will be sharing it with you and taking you through it. The title of my topic today is around making an impact in people's lives through creating shared value. But I want to focus more on how business can be a force for good. And through that, you can then see how we're making an impact in people's lives. I am trying now to share the presentation. I did do it exceptionally well in the dry run. Now I'm not able to. Can someone assist me? Okay.
Who can share? Are you available to assist? We've had gremlins this morning. Oh. Even after the dry run, somehow things are just being weird. Tech team, please, can you assist?
Marissa, can you assist? She's also got the slides just as a backup.
Awesome.
Oh, now it's sending me a message to say who can share. Earlier, it was very simple.
So, Sazeni, at the bottom of your screen, there should be an option for you to say share screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then click that. What is it giving you?
It has done so.
There we go.
Are you able to see?
Awesome. I just press. We can see it.
There we go. Perfect.
Super. So thank you once again for the privilege to be talking to you today. I am going to talk about how business is an active force for good, making an impact in people's lives and building better societies through creating shared value. So when I chose this topic, I did think about it quite extensively, but I decided that a big focus for me today will be around how business is a force for good, and create a case for why and create a case for how. So not only am I going to walk you through what it means to be a force for good. I know that I'm speaking to leaders in different sectors, practitioners who are influencing business and working within businesses. So I'll start from a point where I believe the obsession and focus for business around creating shareholder value began. In 1970, we had our dear Milton Friedman, an economist, who wrote a seminal article that changed the course of business till today. Basically, he wrote that the corporate social responsibility for any company is to maximize profits. From that point, any course or direction for any company became around maximizing profits. And within that frame, capitalism actually expanded and became more. And we could see it across the globe that the main and primary focus for every business was creating shareholder value to the expense of our general population, to the expense of people and planet. However, we have seen fundamental shifts in today's world, which I'll speak to later. But I think I want to just place this in your minds and for you to read up on him a bit more on how, as a result of his teaching, companies really took the direction of how they maximize profits at the expense of people and planet. Africa obviously was at the back end of that. We know that as a continent, we continue to suffer unequal exchange. What do I mean by an unequal exchange? If you look at the African continent, we are rich in mineral resources, but we've got the large conglomerates that come in, extract, and the value of that extraction accrues back to the first world or to the West. Those companies are not domiciled here. The benefit of the shareholders are sitting outside our continent. You can look at that from a mining perspective, the extractives, even agriculture. So Africa continues to be characterized by unequal exchange. The policies that are designed to integrate Africa into a global economy have by far failed and have not brought about the desired structural transformation that we seek. So if you're working in a large corporate today, if you look at your shareholder base, if you look at your investors, you will see that they're not people that are from the continent. So we continue to experience how Africa is a consumer-led continent and not necessarily manufacturing and developing. So what are some of the key challenges that we face? As I mentioned earlier, I want to paint a picture of what it is that we're dealing with, and then speak to why we should be a force for good and how we can be a force for good. Obviously, these are, for me, I selected these as the top 6. There's a lot more that we can speak about. But these for me are what pop out. And if I was to look at my top 10, these fall in the top 6. COVID, no one can excuse or ignore the fact of what that pandemic has done. Both good and both evil. I will say good because it has changed the ways of work. It has brought to the fore how social health or environmental issues can grind economies to a halt. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the nature of business, the way we work, and our lives forever. It has accelerated the need for large corporates and small businesses to start looking at how they drive sustainable growth practices. Climate change. I think no one needs to speak to that one any further than realizing, particularly for us here in South Africa, what happened in KZN with the floods. It is unprecedented. But one can see quite clearly that is linked to climate change. As much as we want to reach net zero by 2050, it will not be possible, particularly for us here in South Africa and our continent, if it is not a just energy transition. Sitting here today, I actually said quite earlier, talking to some of the colleagues, I might have load shedding, and that is an energy crisis. It has forced everybody to start thinking about how to have green energy, but to also diversify your energy mix. Populism. I like the picture of Trump, and because it just brings to the fore how the rise of disinformation and populism has weakened our democratic state and accountability. We saw the greatest nation in the world shift based on opinion, not on fact. Changed their presidency based on opinion, not on fact. We have seen how social media has both good and evil, and how it has affected our young people. Suicide rates have increased. But at the same time, we are more able to, we have seen people who would naturally not have any information, receive information about what's happening in Ukraine. My son speaks about the issues in Ukraine and is only 12. The 4IR, the benefits and the disadvantages of it. I think with COVID, the fourth industrial revolution forced itself in. We had to look at our children sitting at home, not able to go to school, and needing to be learning online, but not able to, because we don't have smart schools. So when we build back from COVID, the focus is how do we build back better? But more importantly, looking at how technology is a key enabler to the growth of our economies. Corruption, need I say more? We in South Africa in particular have just had the state capture reports published, and so many people going through them. But that in itself has deteriorated not only service delivery, but the fact that we sit with load shedding today, Our roads are in a bad state, and it continues to be a big challenge, not only in South Africa, but across the continent. And we are in a process, an anticipated recession that is coming in. So if you can just take a picture of this, you can see how the key global challenges we're facing today require a different approach. Fred's main thinking around maximizing profits for business definitely is not the way to go. It has had major challenges and issues that have come as a result. So these challenges are a result of world systems that have created inequity between the first and the second economies. A few years ago, a fun fact, although still showing the inequity, 300 people in the world had as much wealth as half of the world population. Today, meaning as in 2021, 2022, only 8 people have now amassed so much wealth that's equivalent to half of the global population. And on the flip side, in sub-Saharan Africa, 424 million, almost half of the population on the continent, are living in poverty. The challenge we have in our economy cannot be addressed in the conventional sense. It requires a tripartite social contract to shift the challenges that we see. What is the conventional sense? So there are 3 spheres that generally operate and would look at how to deal with the challenges that we face today. Taking on from the picture that I've painted, as a business, you don't operate in a vacuum. We don't operate in a vacuum. You operate within a sector. So if you're a bank, you're within financial services. If you're in retail, you're within the services sector. So within that spectrum, it is important for any business sector to look within its country and how the challenges that are faced from an economical and social standpoint have to be addressed by specific actions and changes that need to be driven by business. So if I look at business success, it is now interconnected across 3 levels. Some of the challenges that I can say, if I look at the challenge on my left, your right, increasingly businesses can no longer separate themselves from the pressing social issues. And the changing client expectations or customer expectations is challenging the way business thinks today. What is the action on their side? If you're to look to your right, my right, your left, it is to deliver meaningful value in the markets we operate. And for our clients and customers is a powerful way to secure long-term growth and sustainable profits as a business. To do that, you obviously operate within a sector and that within a regulatory landscape that also needs to change and start looking at how the business models that are currently in existence need to be relooked and rethought, and the regulatory environment needs to become more enabling for businesses to thrive, but also for the social challenges that we face. We need to start actively embracing the change and going beyond compliance. There is a huge conversation in today's world, particularly now, around ESG. ESG is compliance. It's voluntary disclosures or non-voluntary disclosures and regulatory disclosures. So every company has got the compliance level that they need to disclose around environmental or social and governance issues. CDP, for example, is voluntary, climate disclosures. But the question here and the shift that is required is to move beyond compliance. At a country level, all the events that we've experienced, the inequality that you see, the changes and the political risk factors that I spoke to upfront require a different form of action. The opportunity that is there is to drive meaningful growth, however, being alert to the environment and particularly the growth of our economies and addressing the issues that we face today, but also creating job opportunities and impactful innovations. So I can take a step back and say, whilst capitalism can be a powerful tool for good and for evil, certainly for evil too, it can lift millions of people out of poverty, Singapore has become one of the recognized economies in today. China, half of the population is in the middle class, now in upper middle class. But it also is creating incredible inequalities across the world. 8 people having wealth to the size of half of the globe, and yet 400, almost 500,000 people sliding back into poverty. The challenge is there. Is there a role for business in solving these problems? I think sitting here today, we can all agree that yes, there is. Larry Fink, I think all of you may know him, the BlackRock CEO. He writes a letter to CEOs' boards on an annual basis. Why this quote is important? Why Larry Fink? BlackRock is the largest private equity firm in the world. They represent the largest shareholders. So when he speaks, we listen as business, even as countries and economies, even as government and civil society, we listen. The shifts that we have seen from his letters on an annual basis for the last 5 years have been around stakeholder capitalism. In his latest one for 2022, he speaks to the fact that to prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society. So he's frankly saying, we will go beyond the numbers. You can present your financial performance, but we want to see what underpins it. We want to see your impact on the climate. We want to see your impact on health. We want to see your impact on education. We want to see your impact on your employees, on the society, on your sector, on your industry. And that in itself becomes quite critical because our current operating environment demands that as business, we start looking at these issues as part of our risk, as part of the cost to company. So there are 3 costs that I articulate given our conversation today and my line of work. Our current operating environment has 3 costs. We have our environmental cost, we have the economic cost, and we have the social costs. So whilst we can look at financial performance and business performance, the underpinning costs that sit within a company that pose the greatest risk for a company are these 3. We can see from the environmental costs, I have already spoken about climate change. But beyond that, if you are in the extractives industry, for example, there is increasing pressure for you to look at natural resources, the ecological impact of the work that you do. But rapid urbanization as well has forced us to start looking at how the challenge for business today, by just only pursuing business growth in the context of such a landscape and inadequate resources, high unemployment, exclusion, inequality is not sustainable. Hence, Larry Fink looking beyond the numbers. The economic cost. Business cannot succeed in societies that are failing. They have not only a human rights responsibility, they have a responsibility and an investment to make sure that they grow their economies. But this does not help, as we can see that there is a narrowing deficit, a trust deficit in all the countries and the economies, and especially in South Africa, state capture, corruption, lack of service delivery, all of this contributes to the economic costs. So if you're a business where there's consistent protest, there's lack of energy, you're actually not able to grow. And most importantly, particularly for our continent and in South Africa, we have a youthful population. Nowhere in the world do we have a more youthful population. Approximately 50% of the population are aged 18. I have a friend of mine, Fred Swanika, who speaks to the fact that by 2050, 1 billion people will need the services of the youthful people on the continent. The labor that is required in the rest of the world, by the way, Europe, America is faced with an aging population. The average age there is around 45 to 50. The average age in South Africa and the continent is 18 to 35. So if you were to just project and look, it becomes important that we invest in the development of our youth so that we can reap the future dividends that contribute to the enhanced prosperity on the continent. But what we see is the opposite. We have high unemployment, and that high unemployment is with the youth population. That definitely needs to be addressed. So is there a role for business in solving these problems? Once again, I raise the question, but I look one CEO, Mark Wilson, who I follow, in his Markets Day, stated quite clearly that the objective for any business is to be a force for good in our planet. It cannot be possible. It can only be possible if CEOs, executives, government think more about the long-term impact on people and planet. Looking at it, if we don't do so, we're stealing from the future to pay for today. So on the arrows, you can see that it's the role of ExCo to deliberate and think about how they're a force for good. Employees are asking the same questions. Customers require it from companies that they buy from. Regulators need to create the enabling environment. So when we talk about how we can be a force for good, there are a number of actors that need to be driving and rowing in the same direction for that impact and for us to realize how we can contribute by being a force for good. I certainly agree with Mark. Based on my experience, I held the role of managing executive for quite a long time within the Absa Group, where a key focus for us there as the corporate was the head of corporate citizenship and community investments, looking at taking care of the whole of Africa. One of the main things that we were able to do was to recognize the impact on the business if we did not address those three costs that I mentioned up front. Very early on, working with the CEO at the time, Maria, we looked at how, as a business, we need to be implementing win-win solutions, win-win strategies, win for business and win for society. And within that, one of the key strategies you will see from a purpose perspective, Absa's purpose is to bring your possibility to life. But when we started looking at what that means and how we can unpack that, one of the key enablers was how we play a shaping role in society. That particular piece within the business was my portfolio to make sure that the social impact, the social license to operate as a business is core to strategy. Prior to this, the focus of the social impact or the social license to operate was a side of the desk activity. It was something that was done by the CSI unit. It did not feature in strategy. It did not feature in the business. Was how it is core to be and is core to part of how we grow our business. It became a balanced scorecard approach. As much as we look at how we restore leadership in our business, it's important for us to play a shaping role in society. It's important for us to build a digital-led business as much as it is important to drive a socially responsible business. So you will see that on the side, we said we'll bring fresh thinking and thought leadership to accelerate innovative solutions to social challenges. We invested behind this at a business level, contribute to the societies in which you operate, and aim to promote inclusive growth. So we cannot prosper in societies that are failing, care for our environment, and help others to do the same. Not only will we internally employ environmentally renewable energy strategies that support and create sustainable green buildings and business, but we'll advise our clients as well. We'll speak to our client base around the importance of how we play a shaping role in society, of how we become a force for good. So a tripartite social contract is needed. And we believed, and as I still advocate, it's to create shared value. If you look at this analysis alone, it is evident that to deal with some of the ESG challenges we see and face today, there is need to ensure that business is a force for good. 52% of South Africans live below the national poverty line. 29% are non-skilled. 1 in 3 the number of South Africans who are currently unemployed. I got this stat post-COVID. So our situation is dire. Do we have the option to sit by the side and not do anything? Certainly not. And I can hear with the conversation and the theme of the conference that that is not an option. Below there, I did a quick analysis to see expenditure related to social cost and the running of a country. 10 billion is spent from CSI. My source there is Trilog. They do an annual service, the Trilog Business and Society. They do an annual survey to see how much corporates are spending within the CSI space and what they're spending on. Last year, 10 billion was spent within CSI, philanthropy and charity work. Only 10 billion rands. Government, my numbers come from SARS when they do their tax numbers and the collection of how much the budget looks like and what they're spending. 1.5 trillion is the allocations that they have collected and they have to deal with service delivery, the social issues, public health issues, economic, environmental issues. That's the number they have. How much is business? Business has a turnover of 19 trillion per annum. So if you were to ask the question, can CSI or civil society organizations and government go the journey alone in trying to deal with the social challenges and the issues we face today? Of course not. Business has the lion's share of how they create wealth to deal with the social challenges and the numbers that I present today. But how do they do that? To the theme of this conference, can your profession be a force for good? I think it is not an option. It is required that you're not only a force for good, but you're an active force for good. To your first keynote, Imitias, he is an active force for good. And I say, in the profession that you're in, for businesses, one way to do that is creating shared value. So an overwhelming majority of business executives, HR leaders, and knowledge expert workers expect that the employer has to be a force for good. As a company, you have to be a force for good. As executives, you have to force for good. You have to be. On the side there, I speak to one of the strategies that we did as well at ABSA. It was a shared growth strategy. I correct myself, when we were still Barclays. I was in the Barclays team responsible for Africa. We developed a strategy looking at shared growth. Our tagline was clear. As we grow, society prospers, and as society prospers, we grow. It is interlinked. And once we began to look at our role in society beyond Friedman's view of maximizing profits, but rather societal leadership, maximizing stakeholder value and not only shareholder value, the strategies that we have employed and developed for most companies has changed. The Edelman Trust Barometer reports that societal leadership is not a core function of business, and most important, its leaders. It is important that as an organization we shift. As people, as leaders within businesses, we shift. So why shared value? Why do I advocate for shared value? And why am I speaking to it as the how-to? Today, more than ever, the interests of business and society are inextricably linked. What is good for society is good for business. The concept of shared value has its foundations in the idea that business models can and should be designed to solve social issues in profitable, yes, profitable, and sustainable ways. We could leverage the resources, skills, and expertise within the private sector to design and offer innovative value propositions that can create new solutions to society's unmet needs. I'll speak to some of the companies that do that. So business and society cannot be viewed as separate. Business cannot operate in economies and countries that are failing. It is a fundamental responsibility that we have to make sure, not only as leaders in those organizations, but we create a fundamental shift in the way we do business. So what is creating shared value? It is predicated on 3 areas. You identify as a business the social challenges that you want to deal with and you want to alleviate within your economy, within the markets that you operate in. But within that, it is important that you also identify what the business opportunities are. You have to look at how you define a tangible opportunity to create new value. Not spread the value, not share the value, but new value, new business opportunities. In so doing, what is important within that framework is to leverage your skills, your corporate assets, and your expertise. So if you're within the banking fraternity, one of the social challenges that are easy for you to deal with because they are core to your core value proposition is financial inclusion. If you're an MTN or you're a technology company, one of the main social challenges you should be dealing with is the 4th industrial revolution and technology being an enabler. You see, within this framework, what it allows you to do is not to look at the social issues as a side of the desk activity. It says to you, core to your fundamental offering into the market for your customers and clients, it is also an area of social change and upliftment, and should be core to how you drive strategy. It should be core to how you shift and become a force for good. Business in society. Business, what is good for society is good for business. Businesses cannot operate in societies that are failing. And the fundamental shift there is to start looking at the business model and changing it to look at how you create new value. I have shared the SDGs there. The Sustainable Development Goals are one way of looking at dealing with social issues at a macro and micro scale. According to a Business Commission report that was done a few years ago, 12 trillion worth of value can be created through looking at the SDGs, 4 systems, and how you can then create value from that. So if you're within the health sector, there's opportunities for that. If you're within, you're looking at SDG 1, that's looking at dealing with employment and economic growth, there is opportunities with that. SDG 13, looking at climate change. Renewable energies have become a thing that is more important, mixed energy use. So if you look at the SDGs and look at the 17 goals, 17 being partnerships, you cannot walk it alone. It is important that we work together to create new value, create multi-sectoral approaches that can shift where we currently are in our operations to one where we create massive value whilst changing our societies. Some best-in-class companies have done that. And they've looked at their profitability, not only to achieve high social returns, but also good business returns. I know most of us shop at Woolworths, but did you know that they actually started a good business journey a few years ago? They adopted the principles of creating shared value and looked at it from a strategic point of view. They totally shifted their procurement base and started uplifting farmers, supporting, educating, and procuring from them. So when you're next at Woolworths, look around you. You will see all the messages of who supplied those tomatoes. Yes, we pay premium, but why do we pay premium? Because they do not disadvantage the farmer. They look at the entire value chain and they make sure they pay what it's worth for. Not only do they uplift the farmers, they also make sure that they preserve and they're economically doing well. So the food in your place, you can trust. that is actually of good value, but is still from the same farms. MTN has transformed its company. They look at creating shared value with ESG at the core. If you go into their strategy, which is public information, you will see that pillar 3 is creating shared value. And I think that begins to make you ask the question, what does that actually mean? So for example, they have introduced connectivity to unconnected and underserved communities across the continent. 100,000 fiber connections they have done. They have shifted from being seen as a company that provides airtime. Because most cases, I remember a friend of mine, I won't say who, you'd say, where do you work? And you'd say, I work at Vodacom. What do you do? I sell airtime. They don't sell airtime. They have shifted and become a technology company. And within that, the management strategy and the changes that they have done at the core, fundamental to them, Ralph will speak to shared value. Nompilo will speak to shared value and how that is creating sustainability for society and for the business. Another interesting case, which I absolutely love, is Danone. Danone were one of the first innovators to creating that 6-pack of the small yogurt. Their objective was simple. We need to fortify young children for them to access, but we need to put it in sizable amounts for the daily requirement of what they need. They shifted an entire industry, but their primary motivation was, how do we help young children grow with the calcium they need and fortified foods they need? That 6-pack not only has seen that business grow exponentially, but has shifted the industry as a whole. It has disrupted the way they have been producing. Today, we just pick a 6-pack or a 12-pack without actually knowing where the innovation came from, without actually knowing what the motivation was. Are these companies being a force for good? I would certainly say yes. What is the management strategy they have used to do that? Creating shared value has been that. Safaricom, need I say more? M-Pesa. Quick stats. Safaricom, when it was introduced, moved the financial inclusion statistics in Kenya from 4 million people in a space of a decade. That number had gone 10 times more to 40 million people able to transact in that economy. Primary motivation, main focus, how do we create shared value? How do we operate within the work that we do within our core business to create the impact that we want to see in the world? It has moved beyond Kenya and is becoming an East Africa proposition, the largest financially included region on the continent. Another example is Econet. Econet in Zimbabwe. When the economy crashed completely in hyperinflation, they, through their core business, created the wallet, and people were able to receive EcoCash. M-Pesa, EcoCash, all these are innovations that not only achieve high social benefits, but they also achieve high social business benefits. Discovery, the vitality offering is live well and for health, but also it's part of their insurance. And that whole model, and they have gone out with creating shared value banking. And you've seen the adverts. It is along the same lines. It is the same business principles. It is being a force for good, however, adopting strategic agenda to how you do that. Coca-Cola 5 by 20 initiative, it was 5 million women by 2020. They exceeded that target. They were to train 5 million women entrepreneurs, the spaza shops. Those coolers that you saw, and they would deliver into a spaza shop with the first set of Cokes and cool drinks, was to help the businesses kickstart, but also train them in financial literacy, business management, in the most basic of skills. One of the organizations that I founded in 2008, Hand in Hand Southern Africa, was a service provider for this program. In South Africa alone, we were able to train 100,000 women in Soweto, in Tembisa, in Alexandra, primarily in the township areas. So is there a case for being a force for good, creating shared value? I would certainly say yes, there is. And as I conclude, I ask the question, and I raise a call to action for the people on the in this conference today, particularly for you. Studies in the US have found that, and I would say that across the board, it's the resources that we don't have and the ability to do the study ourselves, have found that employees, including leaders and knowledge workers, want business to be a force for good. And it can be done in 3 areas. I'll leave you with this. Number 1, at an individual level, me and you, working in a company, being an entrepreneur, working for ourselves, we want businesses to be a force for good. Me as a person, I'm actively looking into their well-being and reflecting how their values and helping them strive. No relationship has been changed more by the pandemic than the relationship between the employer and employees. I was reading this week, and I'm sure some of you saw how Standard Bank had to retract their policy around COVID and their vaccinations. Secondly, at a company level, as a force for good for us as an organization, because we can be seen as a group. We are the organization. We need to start by creating a sustainable and an effective workplace culture that enables people to be a force for good. So employee engagement, the employee value proposition, is critical to how companies can be a force for good. Every company, particularly large corporates, do support colleague engagement, colleague volunteering, and it is critical an action of how companies can be a force for good. But more importantly, it creates that enabling environment where I can be a force for good through the company that I work for. It has been found, and I'm sure you've seen the studies, where a majority of young people will choose and will ask a company and will choose a purpose-led company, purpose-led products before they can work for that company. And lastly, society. To the theme of my talk today and for the conference, it is a requirement that we make an impact in our communities. As business leaders, the requirement is not only for you to be a business leader, but to be a societal leader as well in tackling social issues. And as I close today, I would like to share a short video that will then encapsulate how you can be a force for good by creating shared value.
What is creating shared value all about? CSV is short for Creating Shared Value. It is a powerful business management concept that can promote companies to think differently about their approach to social and environmental issues. It is a strategy for addressing society's challenges through profitable business models. It's all about policies and practices that enhance the competitiveness of companies while improving social and environmental conditions in the regions in which they operate. CSV is not CSR. Creating shared value goes beyond philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. Shared value is not about personal values. It's not about sharing the value already created by firms. It is not CSI. It is not philanthropy or corporate social responsibility. Because in these cases, an organization's social contributions are not necessarily intrinsic to the bottom line. The concept of shared value recognizes that societal needs, not just conventional economic needs, define markets. It is also an important tool to align any business to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. The social challenges identified by the goals provide a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all. When businesses act as businesses, not as charitable donors, they can improve profitability while also improving key measures of societal well-being, environmental performance, public health and nutrition, affordable housing, and financial security. Ultimately, it's all about weaving social need into the very fabric of business and creating both economic and societal value. Shared value is the most powerful practice that any company can use to achieve its purpose at scale. It increases company competitiveness and profitability by solving social problems. It helps to drive innovation by seeking opportunities for both business and society. And ultimately, it helps to create a sustainable future.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sazini. Thank you so much. What a powerful session. And you can see from the chats on your side that it is a buzz with thank you for an informative session, fantastic message, thought-provoking, and it ties in beautifully with the call for action that we started with. And one comment that totally resonates with me is how can our businesses thrive if our societies are failing? How can we be okay with a failing society? And our point of intervention is at an individual level, at a team level, and at an organizational level. So this has been really thought-provoking. So colleagues, we have 15 minutes before we need to get into the next session. Any questions or comments directed to Sazini Mojapelo? You can unmute and share your thoughts.
Sharon, Petrus on this side, or is it on the other side? Or am I in the room or out the room? I don't know. Any case, I'm somewhere.
You are somewhere.
So a great presentation, thank you. So maybe just a question. So what do you think will happen if various stakeholders figure out that organizations are actually just doing this sort of almost like as wolves in sheep's clothing, meaning so they're doing it for their own benefit and not really for a shared benefit? So it's not that I'm not agreeing with your sentiments, not at all, but maybe in your experience, what will happen when stakeholders sort of like figure out saying, hang on, they are not doing it for everyone, they are just doing it for themselves? Thanks.
Well, they have been doing it for themselves, and hence the call to action. Corporate social responsibility is a company makes, for argument's sake, maybe at 1 billion, and of that they give 10 million rands. They are doing it just as a bandage. So it is not a case of what if people find out? Yes, we know that they are. And hence the advocacy to say we need to create shared value. If it's not hitting the bottom line, if it is not about product creation, service, and managing your costs internally, if we don't see you changing and converting your businesses to being energy efficient buildings, we know that you're not doing it for the right reasons. So if you look at stakeholder capitalism, and why I made the point around the CEOs and Larry Fink, because that's the shareholder money, that's the investor money, saying we want to go beyond the numbers and we want to understand how you're operating as a business, how you're impacting your society. So yes, there's been a huge shift in demands from investors and shareholders. And we're hoping because of that, we will see the change that is genuine and authentic.
Thank you very much, Sazin, for clarifying. I think I saw in the chat people were saying, well, this is wolves in sheep's clothing. So yes, it is about the bottom line, but how do we move beyond compliance? How do we start to assist our leaders to think beyond just benefit for themselves? So there's another question from Kathy around how to start CSV. I don't know if it's CSV, Kathy Morgan. Do you want to unmute and ask your question? Where do I begin? Kathy Morgan?
Yes, I do.
Hi, sorry, I was just trying to find my mute button. Hi, so I'm coming in here very ignorant around CSI, CSR spend, and now CSV. And I meant CSV because that's where I would like to see how we look at our spend in business. So yeah, as coming in very new, into an organization of only 100 people, I would like to know, how do I start that conversation that it's not tick box? How do I start? Yeah. So yeah, I know that's a big question to answer.
Not really, actually. I am working currently as one of the managing partners for a company called the Shared Value Africa Initiative. I think you saw the logo in the video. Yeah. So if you just check that or befriend me on LinkedIn, we will be able to have a one-on-one.
I appreciate that. Thanks, Sanzi.
Super.
Fantastic. Thank you. Any other questions, colleagues? While we still have Sazini on the call, you can unmute and ask your question. I'm also just checking on the chat. Don't be shy now.
To say, I can see that there's a lot of thought-provoking and a lot of thinking, and I see the comments. Thank you very much for those comments. The one thing I find in, because I'm a development practitioner by training, I do social development, human development work, and hence my line worked in the NGO sector and in corporate, running the social impact, the social license agenda. The main question from all of us is always, so how do I do it? So I want to be a force for good. So if the company doesn't enable, but if you're a leader in a company, you're asking the question, how? And I've found that for corporates and private sector, the how to, for now, I believe that creating shared value is your how to. We can connect on LinkedIn and I can share more about that. But from a thought leadership perspective, that is your how to. I shared a few companies and I said, for example, look at what these companies are doing. Public information, just Google them and you read and you actually find that it's not a PR stunt. It's not a marketing proposition. It is in their core strategy. MTN will talk about how they are a shared value company, will communicate their strategy as being around creating shared value. So will Woolworths, but they won't put it on banners, but they understand how to be a force for good. So we may have the desire to, but in actual practicality, how do you do it? How do you do that as a business leader? Shared value is one way to do it. It actually comes from Michael Porter and Mark Kramer from the Harvard Business School. They wrote a seminal article called Creating Shared Value. So if you were to check it out, you can also look at that article and it will give you a breakdown of how you can do that. And it would obviously add to the body of knowledge that you already have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I like the comment here that maybe we're overthinking it. We must just start creating shared value. And I think we must look at our locus of control. At which points are we accessing organizations? What kind of conversations are we having? When we have access to leaders, we have an opportunity to start shifting the dial. We can influence where things go. So take courage, step up and start asking the hard questions and interrogate the thinking. So there's another question that came earlier from Lauren Davis around the pandemic. She's asking, do you not think that the COVID pandemic has caused businesses and other sectors to capitalize on profitability? Now, given the financial impact such a pandemic has had on their bottom line. Care to comment on that?
I think what the pandemic did, it was a health crisis that came with an economic crisis. We went into lockdown. There is no business that didn't suffer. Well, there is one sector that did not suffer. That's the technology and the MTNs and the Vodacom. MTN moved into 240 million plus customers on the continent because of COVID. So what does recovery look like? How do we rebuild? We cannot rebuild using old conventional models. We have to rebuild differently. If I am to look at a small business who suffered the most, the SME sector, it actually can be no maximizing of profits. If we look at the corporates, there is need to start looking at it from a different perspective. And I will say that I have seen the shift where one health crisis has led businesses grind to a halt. There is an added risk that has been included in their risk register. And because of that, it has received the right level of attention, be it environment, social, health issues, and now in large corporates' risk portfolio. And they are looking at it differently. The question for us is not to do things the way we have known, but to introduce a new normal and rebuild with inclusive growth in mind. And I will say that it continues to be a challenge. It is not homogeneous. There are different sectors that have received and are moving and are building back differently. But it remains a conversation that is an entire session for another day.
Thank you so much for those nuggets. And I'm going to squeeze in one more question. I know we've got another session coming. So what linkages have been made to influence government and regulators on the shared value initiative?
I must say that the fundamental conversations with government are at a regulator level and the associations. So the conversations there, for example, with National Treasury or SARB for the financial services, that's the government representation there. But the work that is increasingly happening in the education sector with the Ministry of Education is looking at how technology companies can support and enable smart schools, for example. You cannot walk it alone. It cannot be a business proposition outside of government. You will see in one of my very early slides, I've got how business has to play an interconnected role. You've got country, you've got sector, you've got business. You've got government, you've got civil society organizations, you have business. It is not an impact that can be done by business alone. It is actually interconnected and working quite closely with government. But it's also a call to action for business. Typically, business will maximize profits and be wealth creators and stand on the side and say this work of service delivery, social issues is to be dealt with by NGOs and government. That is not the case anymore. For the issues that we face today, the Eskom issue that we face today, the energy challenges that we face today are as much a business issue as they are a government issue. Another closing example is how South Africa managed to raise 8.5 billion dollars towards the just energy transition. That was a concerted effort through the Presidential Commission, Climate Commission, I think it's now led by Daniel, to pull together the resources, present a case. Mining companies were involved, such as Exxaro, civil society organizations such as the NBI were involved, and government led the initiative. It is those kind of multi-sectoral partnerships that will shift the dial in how we engage around social issues.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stazini. Thank you for sharing all those nuggets. Please reach out to her on LinkedIn. Let's keep the conversation going on WOVA. And unfortunately, we do need to close the session. So have a good afternoon with the rest of the sessions. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye now.